They say some places are too old to be healed and too sacred to be saved. St. Emilia's convent, nestled deep within the frostbitten hills of northern England, was one such place. It didn't appear on maps anymore. The trees around it grew too thick, the paths too twisted to follow. The sky above seemed always overcast, and time itself felt slower inside those walls, like every minute hung in the air, suspended between prayer and punishment. Welcome to Convent Nightmares. If you're new here, this is where stories that should have remained buried are brought back to life, one breathless whisper at a time. Make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and hold on to your rosary. You'll need it. Tonight, I will take you into the heart of St. Emilia's, a convent where faith was both the shield and the weapon, where the line between the sacred and the damned blurred with every candlelit prayer, and where one young girl, full of questions and shadowed by grief, stepped through its ancient gates and never truly came out. Her name was Annalise. She was 17 when she arrived, orphaned by a fire that claimed her home and both parents. The fire, they said, started in the walls. No source ever found. No suspects. Just charred ruins and a girl with smoke in her hair and silence in her eyes. The nuns at St. Emilia's accepted her without question. The convent had always taken in wayward girls, those lost to the world. But Annalise was different. She didn't weep. She didn't ask where she would sleep. She didn't flinch at the thick scent of incense or the stone-faced sisters who measured her with disapproving stares. She only carried a leather-bound notebook, scorched around the edges but intact. She never let it out of her hands. The mother, Superior Sister Benedicta, assigned her to cell 14, a cold, narrow room at the end of the west corridor. It had not been used in years. The other girls said it was cursed. The walls inside were darker than the rest, damp even in summer. And when Annalise entered, she whispered something to the empty air. "I'm back. Strange, isn't it? How some voices don't carry the weight of surprise. If you've made it this far, leave a comment. Tell me, would you have stepped into cell 14? The first week passed with quiet obedience. Annalise followed the routine. Woke at 4 a.m., prayers until 6, chores in the garden, meals in silence, vespers in the stone chapel with the broken cross above the altar, the one nobody dared to fix. But even in her discipline, there was something about her the sisters couldn't understand. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her voice carried like wind through hollow bones. Cold, dry, and ancient, she wrote endlessly in her notebook. No one saw the pages. One girl tried, Sister Maria, barely 20, curious and kind, and her hand brushed the cover. Annalise turned, slowly, and looked at her. Just a look, but Maria backed away, trembling. Later that night, Maria fell ill with something the doctors couldn't name. Her skin blistered in patterns. Crosses, some said. Others saw letters. She died within a week. The notebook was never touched again. And then came the singing. At first, soft, like distant voices during morning mass. But it came from nowhere. No mouths moved. No organ played. Just a low, lilting harmony of female voices, chanting in Latin that no one remembered teaching. It echoed through the stone halls during the night, sometimes seeping into the girls' dreams. They would wake, crying, clutching crucifixes to their chests. One girl tore out her own tongue in her sleep. Another blinded herself with a rosary. The Mother Superior denied it all. Mass hysteria, she said. The devil tests us with fear, but fear is not the devil's alone. Sometimes it belongs to God. You're still with me? Good. Leave a comment if you'd like to know what happened in cell 14 next. I promise, it only gets darker. The nuns began locking their doors at night, not for fear of the outside world, but of what might already be inside. The west corridor, where cell 14 waited like a patient wound, grew colder each evening. No candle stayed lit past midnight. No sound echoed through that stretch of stone, but the distant, rhythmic scraping. Like nails across ancient wood, Annalise, he didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she noticed everything. She moved through the halls as if she belonged to them, or they belonged to her. She no longer joined the other girls during meals. Her place at the table remained set, untouched, the bread molded. The water evaporated, yet she never appeared hungry. Her skin stayed pale but firm, her hair falling around her face like a black. Veiled one night, Sister Clemencia, the oldest of the nuns, nearly 90 and blind, was found in the west hallway, standing before Annalise's door, whispering to the wood. When the other sisters tried to pull her away, she screamed, "She's writing the names. All of them. Even mine. I can hear the ink screaming. She died before dawn, choking on her own tongue. And on her wall, carved into the plaster by trembling hands, were the words, 'The book remembers who the fire forgets.' Still, the Mother Superior insisted this was nonsense. Superstition. Grief manifesting into mass delusion. But her own eyes betrayed her resolve. She stopped visiting the west corridor. She started sleeping with a crucifix tied to each wrist. And she never, ever looked into the chapel mirror again. Are you with me? Still breathing? Leave a comment if your heart's beating faster. We're only descending further. Annalise stopped. Attending prayers altogether by the second month. When Sister Judith went to retrieve her, she returned pale, shaking, and mute. Her hands trembled for days, and she never entered the West Wing again. Eventually, she was sent away to recover. They said, but she never wrote, never called, never returned. The other girls began keeping track of the nights, scratching tallies under their beds. Every 7th night, something changed. The walls groaned. The moon vanished from the sky. And always, always the singing returned, stronger, closer. This time in harmony with another voice. Annalise's Dot, it was her voice that filled the stone chapel one night when Sister Alina ventured there alone. Alina had been defiant, the only one who still claimed this was all an act. Psychological trauma, teenage rebellion. But that night, she found the chapel empty, or so she thought. No candles, no wind, just Annalise's voice, drifting in a mournful melody that didn't belong to this world. Alina lit a match to see better, and that's when she saw them, not just one, but dozens of figures lining the pews, all in nuns' habits, all without faces, just smooth, blank skin where eyes and mouths should have been. But they turned. They watched. She ran. She made it as far as the fountain outside before her body collapsed, her mouth wide open in a scream, frozen, her lungs full of water, though she had never fallen in. And around her neck was a rosary made of teeth. Still think you'd visit. The chapel alone? Leave a comment. Tell me if you'd have run, or stayed to hear the rest of that song. It was clear then that something ancient had been awakened. Not summoned, awakened. It had always been there, perhaps asleep, perhaps simply watching. Annalise was not its victim. She was its voice. One brave girl, Sister Helena, finally confronted her. She waited until Vespers, followed her to the chapel, and stood before her. Who are you? She asked. Annalise looked up. Her eyes were not human anymore. Not glowing, not black, but hollow, deep, like tunnels without end. I am the page, she said. Not the writer, not the ink, just the page, and it's still writing. She walked past Helena, and for a moment Helena felt. Every prayer she had ever whispered pulled from her like breath from lungs. She collapsed to her knees, weeping, not from fear, but from the absence of faith. and somewhere, faintly, a page turned. That night, something shifted in the convent. Not just in the halls, but in the very stones that held the place together. Doors wouldn't open. Windows refused to shatter. Light would not pass through stained glass. And time began folding in on itself. The girls started forgetting how long they'd been there. One swore it had been 2 weeks since her last meal. Another thought it was still spring, though winter howled outside. Sister Ruth counted the bells and found there were 13 tolls every midnight. But no one else heard them, only her. And when she tried to explain, her tongue turned to ash mid-sentence. No one saw it, but everyone heard the scream. Meanwhile, Annalise remained in cell 14, writing, always writing. The notebook no longer closed. The pages flipped by themselves. The ink shimmered with movement, like it breathed. Sometimes the words faded. Other times they bled. One sister claimed the ink was red. Another said it was black. A third swore it was gold. All were wrong, because ink has no color. When it comes from the throat of something ancient, leave a comment if you dare. Read what she wrote. Or if you think the notebook should be burned, though nothing ever really burns at St. Emilia's. The Mother Superior grew thin. Her hair grayed. Her eyes lost their pupils. She spent her final days wandering the chapel, reciting verses. Backward, scribbling crosses on her skin with charcoal. And then, one morning, she vanished. No signs of struggle. Just her shoes by the altar, and a single phrase scratched into the marble with what looked like bone. The convent remembers. After her disappearance, Sister Imelda took charge. She was younger, stronger, but even she was not immune. She tried to modernize things, break the routine, introduce new hymns, paint the chapel. She removed the cracked crucifix. But when the hammer touched the nail, every window shattered inward. Glass fell like tears onto the pews, cutting through wood, cloth, and skin. And still no one bled. Just silence, heavy, breathing. Imelda put the crucifix back. And no one ever tried again. The west corridor now felt like a different world. The stones were damp with a cold that came from beneath, not above. The air held the scent of burnt paper and iron, and cell 14 no longer needed a door. It stayed closed without one. No one could enter unless Annalise wished it. One girl, desperate and grieving, tried to speak with her. Her name was Beatrice. She had lost her sister, her faith, and most of her mind. She knelt outside the room, whispering, "What do I do to stop this? Tell me what it wants." Annalise's voice came from inside. "It wants to be remembered." Beatrice opened her wrist with a shard of mirror and wrote the Lord's Prayer in her own blood down the west hall. She smiled as she did it. They found her that way, smiling, lifeless, with words that burned into the wall long after the blood dried. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us. Into memory. Still think this is just a story? Tell me in the comments. Or tell me what you'd do if the walls started whispering your name. It was around then that the visitors came. Not priests, not authorities, not even the curious. Just 2 women, dressed in gray, faces blank, hands pale and long. They didn't knock. They simply walked through the main doors, which had not been opened in months, and asked, "Is the girl still writing?" No one answered, but they smiled, as if they already knew. They were seen walking toward cell 14, but not away from it, never away. And after that, the convent changed again. Now the nuns heard prayers they never said. One awoke with her tongue pierced by a golden pin. Another found rosary beads sewn into her mattress. The garden stopped growing. The wine turned black. The bread broke itself. Yet Annalise kept writing, kept singing. And in the chapel, the statues of saints began to crack from the inside. One evening, just after matins, the bell in the tower rang 13 times. No one pulled the rope knot. All the sisters gathered in the courtyard, drawn by the horde. A natural chime. The sky had turned a color no one could name. Not gray, not black, but something in between, like the dying breath of light. In the center of the convent grounds, they saw Annalise, her feet bare, her arms raised, her notebook floating above her palms, pages turning without wind. She was speaking, or rather her mouth was moving, but the voice that came wasn't hers. It was deep, layered, hundreds of voices at once, men, women, children, some crying, some laughing, some screaming. The air around her pulsed like breath, and the ground beneath her cracked like thin ice. One of the sisters, Sister Elsbeth, stepped forward, calling her name. "Annalise, please, stop this." Annalise looked at her, and for a brief, impossible second, the air between them collapsed. Time stopped. Light dimmed, and Elsbeth's body folded in on itself, silently, as if erased from reality. No scream, no blood. Just absence. The sisters scattered, crying out to saints who no longer answered. Some ran, some prayed, some simply dropped to their knees and waited to be forgotten. And above them all, the notebook kept turning pages. If you're still listening, tell me in the comments, would you run? Or would you kneel? That night, something opened beneath the convent. They heard it, a tearing, groaning moan of earth giving way. The well at the center of the cloister bubbled over with thick, ink-black water. The walls bled symbols no one could translate, and the moon refused to rise. 3 girls tried to escape through the forest. They were found the next morning, standing at the gates, eyes wide, hair white, barefoot, each holding a piece of paper. Each page read the same thing: "She knows your name." From that point forward, the convent ceased to function as anything but a cage. There were no more services, no more visitors. Clocks stopped, the bells silenced, and the candles extinguished themselves if lit. Cell 14 pulsed with an unnatural hum. No one dared approach. No one except Sister Helena. She hadn't spoken in days, hadn't eaten. She moved like someone dreaming. She stepped barefoot down the west corridor, her habit torn and stained with something that smelled like ashes. She entered the room without knocking. The stone swallowed her. The door, which hadn't existed for weeks, closed, and the humming stopped. Silence took over the convent for 3 full days. No voices, no footsteps, just the sound of the wind threading itself through cracked glass and weeping stone. On the 3rd day, a knock echoed from cell 14. When the sisters opened it, Annalise was gone. In her place was Helena, sitting calmly on the floor, the notebook in her lap. She smiled. Her eyes were not hers anymore. "They remember me now," she said. "So it's your turn."